The AMR24 has just released at the crack of dawn for the Aston Martin team. The team in green has released their new challenger that they hope they can get podiums with, wins with, and take that next step in their evolutionary car. Now, this car is pretty similar to that of the AMR23, but with some very important changes that we can go over, and going over what they've done aerodynamically and technically with the car, with a lot being set from Dan Follows, but also being shown on screen through their renders of their actual real car. This is the real thing. Let's go over everything you need to know, and if you're new here, please subscribe and like. That would mean the world. So let's get into the AMR24. So as I said, with all my videos, we start off from the front of the car. So the front of the car is actually where particularly this car is different. The front wing before, the nose used to go all the way down to the bottom, trying to split off the air that way. It seems that they've flattened out the actual nose cone to the car, and their front wing shape is pretty similar to what they started off with. It's not the front wing shape that they necessarily had in the beginning. It's got a little bit less outwash than it used to, and depending on what angle you actually look at this car from, you can actually see that it's a pretty flat, almost low type of front downforce wing. They were trying to go for this last year, but the car was super unstable whenever they had a front wing that wasn't very loaded on the car. It was something that they had a pretty complete issue for. So maybe this year they've resolved it, because a big thing about this car is that they're trying to get a better baseline for the car and how the actual setup for the car is supposed to properly be. They struggled with setup a lot last year, and the car was very slidey on its rear end due to having to change the front wing that they didn't really want to do in the first place, but the FIA kind of forced them into it because of the whole entire flexing. So this front wing is pretty similar to what they had in the beginning, with the exception of this nose cone moving up. And I don't know if this is with every car, but specifically looking at the Aston Martin, I don't know, it's pretty interesting to look at. The actual wheel covers for the car with that little bottom part of the wing, I don't think I've actually noticed that yet on most cars. I think this is another thing that they've added, this little winglet in the front of the car. Now you tell me in the comments if it is or isn't, but the actual front suspension itself is pretty high. That wishbone seems a little higher than before, so they've probably added some anti-dive into that front suspension. The bib tray itself, which is actually, funny enough, made by Aston Martin in 2022 on that boat of a car, that is still the same. And going into that undercut from this view, looks pretty much the same with the exception of the side pod inlet. The front is pretty similar, but this nose cone shape and front wing is different to what they had before, with the connection going down to the bottom. Now, looking at it from this kind of angular view, we can tell a couple things. As I said, that side pod is pretty much now like the Red Bull. It seems like a common trend to copy that whole entire side pod inlet, because it gives you a bigger undercut and also forces more of the air to go lower than above the car. And it does provide still good cooling because of the lip and how the air is going into that side pod, but pretty similar. And looking from this view, there isn't too much change with the car from this angular view. But let's look from the side. That's where we'll see actually some more changes that Aston Martin has made to their AMR24. Now, looking at it at this side view, you can pretty much see pretty much all of the car. There's quite a few changes that are important to this team. Firstly, the way that the halo is designed, we're missing a lot of those wing elements they had last year, and I think that there is going to be more. This is just the render of the car. I also think there's a couple more areas that I think we will see different changes in. This car is actually, funny enough, supposed to run today. I don't know at what time, but they're running this car pretty soon. So I guess we'll see the real car also in pictures maybe, but we haven't seen the shakedown video just yet. But the actual undercut itself, if you look at the floor, this is the exact same floor from Coda. And they ran the Coda floor. They ran the floor that they ran from the beginning of the year in Bahrain. They had a revised floor in Qatar. They went through a whole bunch of floors, and they actually ended up deciding to go with the Coda floor. Now, the Coda floor worked very well. When actually using it, they were in the top teams when it came to top speed in Coda, but then something was wrong with the setup, and I'm assuming the base of the car wasn't properly set up for that floor setup, and that's a big change. They've made the car lighter. You can see that with a little bit of carbon fiber that's been added, but the car is also in this metallic paint job. I think it looks slick. I think it's a beautiful car. Regardless of what you can say, this green is just, it pops. And nighttime shots of this car looks amazing. I love the look of the car, but the actual undercut itself, especially from this view, you can see that they've expanded that undercut And that was kind of something that went with the floor anyways. Because of that floor design, the undercut was expanded, but they still kept this deep gully with its rear downforce, but it's that Canada version of it. It's not as deep as it used to be. It used to be a lot wider, but also going deeper into the car. Now it's more towards the back of the car. Somewhere towards the middle of that side pod is where we see that deep gully. Now, McLaren ended up adopting this somewhere near towards the end of the season, and they were much better. But this is obviously an evolutionized car to what they had in the AMR23. The AMR23 wasn't perfect. It had a lot of flaws, and with those flaws, ended up resulting in pretty bad results towards the end of the season when they were testing a lot of things. So the actual base of the car having this now deeper side pod undercut, but running the floor that they thought was going to give them a lot more time is a lot more important. The engine cover is pretty similar, but it's a little bit bigger in that middle area. It seems like they've redefined a couple of areas. I do think that there's still going to be some changes towards this area. It still looks pretty simplified to me, and they could still be hiding stuff, but the engine cover is pretty similar. And they actually have the shark fin design with that outer edge cut for more cooling to go in the middle of the car towards the back there in the engine cover. They were running this at some point, but then they switched over back. They've been running a lot of different setups on this Aston Martin car, and it seems like they've put together what they think is the best setup, and they say that they're very happy with this evolution of the car. The rear of the car is where the real magic happens, and this is where the biggest changes have actually happened for this car. So finally, ending it off on the rear, and here, pretty much also the same with this kind of beam wing. This beam wing is pretty similar, but I have a feeling they're going to actually adopt the beam wing in the one beam wing setup that we've been seeing, and actually having that one in the middle plane. But the actual rear suspension for the car has been completely changed. They went from a push rod rear suspension to a now pull rod rear suspension. And that will be a drastic difference because of what's been being talked about with the car and how their diffuser is supposed to be a lot smaller than it was before because of the gearbox, and to expand more air going to the back of the car. This is a big issue they had with their diffuser and setup, and we can tell here that they've changed to a pull rod suspension in the rear of the car. This is probably the biggest thing. You also look at this rear wing. This rear wing is highly not updated to what they had. They had the cutout in the back of the car. That was even an update in Abu Dhabi, but even before that, there was an update. And I think even in Baku, they introduced a completely different rear wing that helped them a lot in DRS efficiency. They also don't have that rear wing cutout that helps them with the air that goes over the tires. A lot of teams have adopted this and already shown that in the renders. So funny enough, Aston Martin is hiding more stuff than I thought. The actual engine cover itself is also very similar to that of the Canada engine cover. It's not similar to what they had in the beginning of the season with it just straight out. They've got these little humps into them, kind of pretty similar to the W14, actually, funny enough. But overall, this car is a evolution to what they had of last year. The car last year wasn't running to the greatest spec when they needed it to. And if you look at the car from the same views, looking at the 23 and the 24, the biggest things you can notice is that side pod undercut change that they've done. Very similar now, I think, to the W14 in the way that it's done that rear part of that side pod and more of a undercut. The floor edge itself is much different to that of the 23. 23 had pretty much no floor edge, and 23 showed everything on the car. But 24, I'm a bit hesitant to say that the actual rear wing and that rear part of the car is the same. I don't think it is. I think that's going to be changed, especially with the rear wing cutout, and the front wing itself is obviously a big change as well. But this is an evolution, so there is a lot of expectations going on here. They expect wins, podiums, and continuing on that trend they had in 2023. But I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Have they done enough? Because that's going to be the big question for any team that does an evolution instead of a revolution. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Please leave a like, subscribe. It would mean the world. And peace.